This is episode 18 with Jake Thompson. Your challenges don't define you. However, how you choose to handle them does. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Laugh at Adversity podcast. I'm your host, Gary Savoy. Having overcome medical trauma, I've made it my mission to uncover all of the secrets to overcoming life's challenges and living a better life. Each week, I will bring you an inspiring person or message. You'll hear from some of the most inspirational people on this planet, including those who have overcome adversity firsthand. My goal is to provide you with everything you need to conquer your challenges and to turn your struggles into strengths. Jake Thompson is the founder and chief encouragement officer of Compete Every Day, where he inspires others to focus on becoming the best versions of themselves. When I first stumbled across Jake's podcast, Compete Every Day, I knew there was a huge overlap over our purposes. We're trying to get people out of the mindset of being complacent and to compete every day regardless of the struggles or adversity that you might face. Jake comes on the show to talk about going after what you want, being better than yesterday, and building a competitor's mindset. In this episode, you'll learn the meaning behind compete every day and why you should only be competing against yourself. We also talk about comparing yourself to others and how it can be so exhausting. And also, the keys to achieving your goal is to actually focus on the process and not the end goal. We also talk about how your story can impact and inspire others, and why courage always makes a better story than comfort. So without further ado, here's my interview with Jake Thompson. Hi, Jake. Welcome to the Laugh at Adversity podcast. It's great to have you on here today.
Hey, I appreciate the invite. I'm excited to be here, and as you shared prior offline, we have a lot of commonalities in the work that we do and the messages we share. So I'm looking forward to talking.
Yeah, as soon as I came across your podcast, Compete Every Day, and your website, you got a clothing line, and just your overall message, I realized that there were a lot of commonalities between us. And I'd love to have you start off by talking about why you started Compete Every Day and kind of, the purpose behind it and your passion for it.
Yeah, so really it evolved out of a desire to do something more with my legacy is kind of the best way to put it. I had a consulting business in 2008, 9, and 10. Was looking to rebrand it into something really beyond my name. Was reading a book by a guy named Donald Miller called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years. And in the book, Miller talks about the importance of story and the lives that we live really influence our story and what that story tells others that we believe is important by our actions. And so I knew at that moment I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to encourage people and motivate them with positive messaging. That's been a skill set of mine since an early age, the gift of gab that I think my mom would laugh about, but really loving on people, encouraging people. And so I'm a competitive guy. I had this idea of pursuing greatness in multiple areas of your life. And so I tinkered with a handful of names until Compete Every Day stuck. And I had a number of friends that knew me well, felt it was a great fit for who I was. And the message that I was trying to convey about competing against yourself and competing to beat your yesterday's best. And so from there, late 2010, had the idea, spent about 8 months tinkering with a few different projects to try to get that message out, whatever seemed to resonate the best. And finally, it was through T-shirts and selling T-shirts and tank tops out of the back of my car with this message about competing every day for your life that things started to pick up and take off from there.
I like that. So I'd like to circle back. You talked about competing against yourself. So your message is really about, competing against yourself and not comparing yourself to others, right?
Yeah, because the issue that we get into with comparison is an exhausting activity, especially as more social media platforms develop and more of our attention runs on those platforms. It's very easy to get caught up comparing where you are, knowing your entire story, to where someone else's highlight reel is and only seeing the teeny tiny bit that they post on social media. And so that's an exhausting task. Whereas competing against yourself is understanding how you do things, what you do well, what you don't do well, and finding a way to build on that each and every day. The analogy I love to share is a track star. If you think about a sprinter, when they take off out of the gate, they're focused on straight ahead, looking at their finish line, staying in their lane. The moment that racer begins to look to their left and to their right, behind them to see where anyone else is, they automatically slow down. Our bodies are not built in a way that we can be turned in another direction and still run at top speed going forward. But it's only the racer that's focused on their finish line, staying in their lane, doing their best at optimal speed, are they able to win that race. And so the same applies to our life. The moment that we start looking at everyone else, we slow down, we get tired, we get distracted. Whereas we're focused on our lane, our lives, what we can do to be better than we had before, we can reach our optimum output. And ultimately, that's my goal, is to try to create a mindset and attitude and eventually a way of life with people where they're competing every day, so that when they get to that end day, that final breath that we have, you're able to say you ended on empty. You are completely exhausted, having spent everything that you've been given in the pursuit of everything you desired.
I like that message. Just listening to you speak, it sounds like you've really reached your goal, because you talked about, leaving a legacy and then story and the importance of story. And it seems like you've been able to combine competing every day, building that mindset, and, including and incorporating your story into it. So I love that. What are some steps that you might have to develop, this mindset, a competitor's mindset? Because for some of us, it might be difficult, to go to the gym, that night, or get out of bed in the morning and go for a run. What's some of the tips that you can give somebody?
Yeah, so one of the first things that I always encourage people to do is to track it. And you don't have to be as incredibly detailed as say an athlete training for an Olympic weightlifting meet, or tracking your nutrients in every single meal, unless that's your goal. And so for me, one of the things I love to use is there's a journal called Best Self Journal. bestself.co is their website. I will alternate between using them and a 5-minute journal, which also has an iPhone app version. And what those journals do incredibly well is, if you start and end the day with them, they allow you to evaluate your wins and your lessons from each day. And you can build on it. So for me, tracking is a huge piece of it, because if I start the day and I have just 3 goals I've got to hit for the day, it's not busy work, these are big goals. So writing 500 words a day, I need to do 5 sales calls, and then I need to update advertising. So those are the big 3. If I hit those 3, that is a great day for me, because I accomplished the task. Well, when I get to the end of the day and I'm looking back on the day, there's an opportunity to write what you're thankful for. But there's an additional spot to write, what are my wins from the day? Did I hit all 3 of my goals? And then what are my lessons? Did I lose track of time and procrastinate? Did I give into a bad habit? Did I skip the gym because I spent 30 minutes surfing on Facebook doing nothing productive? When I'm able to look at that the next day, I'm more cognizant of what I did, where I misstepped, so that if I start to catch myself going that direction on day 2, I can remember, oh, wait, this tripped me up yesterday. I need to do something different today. And it could just be that one thing. And so for me, that's a big piece of it, is tracking it. And then another big thing that I always love to encourage people with is, don't get overwhelmed by how far you have to go. I think too often we get deterred from, I'll say, destiny that we've set. Not a predestined location, but we get deterred from the destiny we want to reach because we're too distracted of how big the goal is. A lot of alliteration there, but really it's the idea that if you're wanting to run a marathon and you've never even run a 5K, the idea of running 26.2 miles is insane.
Right.
And you're like, I can't run that. And so a lot of people, what they do is they'll run for a day or 2, and then they'll just quit because they're like, oh my gosh, I'm dying after running 1.5 miles. I can't run 26 miles. Screw it. I'm out. Well, in the book Motivation Myth, Jeff Hayden talks about The reason a lot of people don't reach their goals is because they don't have a process by which to build those. You see, when you focus on solely on the big goal of, hey, I want to get this amount of shape, well, then you lose focus on it when you miss that mark, versus if you have a process. So for you mentioned, hey, it's tough going to the gym or getting a run. If I set out my week that I have 7 days, and on 3 of those days, I'm going to the gym for at least 30 minutes. And on 2 of those days, I'm going to walk or go for a light jog or stretch. I'm doing something active during those 3 days. And so that gives me 1 grace day, essentially. And so every time I can hit that check, I'm only focused on this week. I'm not worried about that end goal, because if I focus on this day and this week, I'll eventually hit that end goal. It's why, and if you hear authors talk about writing a book, they never tell you, hey, when I sat down, I wanted to write a book. My process was, I'm writing 500 or 1,000 words a day. And that was my process. I wrote 500 or 1,000 words a day, whatever my goal was, until I wrote the book. And that's how it gets done, is focusing only on that process.
I think that's really important. To go back to your example, of running a marathon. When you create a goal that is that big, you're right, it becomes very difficult to achieve if you don't set either small goals, like incremental goals that you can build on, or create a process like you mentioned, because it just becomes daunting. It becomes too big of a task. And, after you run a 5K and you realize, you're wiped out, you're super sore, it's easier just to give up than, to reset and set a new goal, a little bit larger goal, and to keep working towards that marathon.
Yeah, and it's funny, if you think about a marathon as our example that we talk about, and one of the things that I frequently mention, when people talk about these big goals they have in life, I want to be a millionaire, I want to do this, most of them just talk about it. They never create a process, they never go, because they say, oh, it'd be nice to have, but it's so far away. And when you think about a marathon, what's the scariest part of a marathon? The part that you're like sick at your stomach, you're anxious, you wonder if you're going to go to the bathroom on yourself. It's at the beginning. Like, it's always when you're waiting in the corral before you ever start the race. It's always that hesitation, because there's an unknown up ahead. You've trained for it, you know it, but there's still a little bit of anxiety because you haven't started. The moment the gun goes off and you start running, all that anxiety and fear just disappears. All you're focused on is moving 1 step at a time. Like, to get to mile 26, you got to run to mile 13. And to get to mile 13, you got to run mile 1. And to get to mile 1, you got to take the first step. And so it's literally taking things 1 step at a time throughout that entire process, and not letting those big goals that you have to have in life, those things, those North Stars that you run at, distract you or discourage you because of how far away they are. You just focus on that next step.
Yeah, I like that, because you're right. The fear is right before, right at the start. And if you take another example, say jumping out of an airplane, right? Your fear is, you don't have fear maybe when you sign up, but as the week approaches, you start to have, more and more fear as the nights get closer. And then finally the day comes. The most fear probably sets in. Then once you get up in that plane and you're about to jump, that's when the most extreme fear presents itself in you. But as soon as you jump and you're free floating in the air, there's no fear there. Or if there is, you're in the present moment, and it's a little too late for that, and the action's there. So I feel like if you can kind of create the same mindset towards your goals, where even though you might be afraid to take those steps, if you just try taking those steps and set small actionable goals and create that process that you mentioned, it makes it easier to develop a mindset where you can keep achieving things.
Yeah, and if we take it a step further, going off of the the name of your show, Laughing at Adversity, when major adversities strike us, it's rare that we're ever going to overcome it in one fell swoop. When someone gets that cancer diagnosis that we all dread, you're not going to go into the doctor the very next day and having completely beat it. And so you focus on, I'm going to stay alive. I'm going to be stronger than cancer. I'm going to win today.
Right.
And then the next morning when you get up, it's the same exact approach. It's 1 day at a time, which is why our message is compete every day as three separate words because it's something you do every single morning when you wake up. It's the choice you make in the mirror that I'm going to compete today.
For me, I like to lay out my goals where I have a few things that I'd like to kind of check off my, I'll say to-do list, but my to-do list is specific to sort of, the podcast and laugh at adversity versus, doing the dishes or taking out the dog. But that's a separate to-do list. But anyways, I like to separate my goals, to have a few actionable things that I can do each day, but also bigger goals for the week and bigger goals for the month. And every month I try to revisit my goals and make adjustments when necessary. Do you follow some sort of a process that's similar?
Yeah, I do. And so what I try to do is in November, December, I'll set my goals for the year ahead. So all of 2018's goals are written out. From there, I'll make quarterly goals because I'll say, all right, here's my goals for the year. Here's what I'm going to do. So then I'll put down and it's just the same process we just talked about in terms of running the marathon. What's that process? Then I'll put my quarterly goals. Okay, so if we want X in sales, that means I have to hit this average a quarter. So quarter 4, I need this. Well, for me to do that, I need to set this up in Q3. And so I build out each thing quarterly, and then off of that monthly and then weekly, knowing that, all right, if this needs to get done in a week, that means I've got to do this every day. If I need to book X amount of speaking gigs a year, that means I need to ultimately breaking it down. This is how many sales calls I need to be making or emailing out a day to get there. And so I have those action items that I check everything else off, because if I can hit those, then the other things that start dropping on your plate of, for us, a new t-shirt design or customer service emails, things like that, I can outsource to members of my team who are great at supporting me, or I understand this doesn't add to that big goal. Is it really that important?
Right. So you set these goals and then you reverse engineer them to kind of get your action items to achieve those goals. Is that correct?
Yeah, I try to reverse engineer as much as I possibly can. And if I can't, all I think about is, all right, if I don't know how, there's a gap. I know what the first few steps are, but I'm not quite sure steps 5 through 9, and then I'm at the goal. I just say, all right, what's step 1? What is one thing I can do to figure it out? And then I do that. And so if my goal for the week is X, then I'm not quite sure how to completely finish it, well, then I just start with where I know to start, or I ask someone, hey, if you were going to do this, what would you do? Where would you start? And then I can hopefully start in that direction. And usually once you get moving, you know where to take that next step, and then that next step and that next step.
Right. So whether it's you or when you're working with some of your clients, what's some advice that you can give somebody who might be having difficulty achieving their goals? Maybe they failed and they're struggling to kind of get back on the horse and to continue towards their end goal. What's some advice that you can give somebody?
Yeah, so I would tell that one person that you are an incredible example of grit and perseverance right now. And the world has, unfortunately, too few of those inspirations where people are continuing to press forward in the face of adversity. So the one thing I'm always going to remind them is, why did you start in this process to begin with? Why was this important to you? What was your goal in the beginning of starting out? But more importantly, why was that goal so important? What about it was going to change your life, your mindset, make everything better? If you can understand the why behind it, then you can start to see, one, are they pursuing really the right goal? Evaluate, is this really the right goal for root cause? If it is, and if it's that important to you and that why, you've got to keep going. Regardless of how you feel, because some days we're never going to feel the motivated to do it. Some days we're not going to feel like we have a chance to win. But you have to get up and keep doing it, because no matter who you are, single, 14-year-old, high schooler, 55-year-old, father of 4, doesn't matter. People are watching you. People always are watching you. And what they're watching is seeing how you're responding to adversity. And for many times in life, our lives, our actions, our lessons are telling a story to people. And if they see us refuse to give up, then when they're faced in a similar situation in their own life, they might remember us more than likely they're going to remember us, and they're going to remember how we constantly pursued that and continue to drive, and how inspiring that was to them, that they also have a chance. That's kind of the one thing I hit home with people about a lot on Compete is your story is never just your story, because how often is anyone listening to this show, you've been inspired, influenced, impacted by someone out there, whether you know them personally, whether you follow them online, whether you read their content. Something about that story has impacted you to take action, to change something, to try something else. But if that person hadn't done that, if that person hadn't shared that failure or what they eventually did to overcome it, or the tough grind that they were going through for 10 years just trying to, quote, make it, then your life would not have been impacted. And so you have the ability to be that story that overcomes that adversity, that changes someone else's life. And if it, for some reason, never clicks, you spend all of your days pursuing this effort, you continue to make progress, but you don't quite get there. Two things have happened. One, you have to look at how far you've come from the beginning and see how much you've grown as an individual. That's another reason I love for people to write and track stuff down. It's like if you go to the gym and start to work out, and the next week you go back to the gym and you don't really remember what weight you lifted, and you're not really quite sure what weights to start with or work with, and you don't ever kind of track any of it. You just go to the gym, you lift a little bit. Your progress is incredibly slow. Sometimes you don't even have progress because you're never really pushing yourself hard enough. But if you go in and you write down, all right, this week on bench press, I did 135, 145, 155. I got 5, and then on that last set, I failed on my third rep. Cool. The next week you go in, you can build on that. You have something to build on. And then 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the road, when you don't feel like you're really going anywhere and you're like, I'm not really getting stronger, you can flip back through that journal and see, oh, well, I'm starting now on 185 or 200 as my first set, and I used to really struggle with 115 or 135. And it flips your perspective a little bit of, I am making progress. I am getting stronger. I am getting better. And it gives you a little bit of motivation to keep going some more. So that's kind of the first thing, is our lives are changed by these journeys and these things that we overcome. And the second thing it does is it gives someone else an example of what it looks like to never give up. And it provides them the opportunity to see it, so that when they're faced with adversity that's different, they have a role model and someone to look at and say, that's what not giving up looks like. That's what fighting and competing every day looks like. I need to figure out how to do that too. And it greatly changes their trajectory.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think, first of all, I'd like to ask you, do you use a notebook, or do you have any apps that you're able to track your workouts with?
So it depends on what my workouts are. From me, from a standpoint, I go to a studio gym. The coaches have some different programming, but we have a set strength schedule. And so I just have old school paper and pen. I have one page that's squat, one page that's deadlift, one page that's cleans, and one page is that bench. And so I'll write down date, the workout setup for the program, the weights I used, and then I'll put a little note out to the side so that the next time we may do, one day I could do 4 sets of 5 back squat. And so I need to track that weight. The next time I go in, we might be doing sets of 10 or 12. Well, I need to write that down, how I felt, so that, a week or two later when I go back in and we're doing sets of 5 again, I can look at it and say, oh, I got all 4 of those sets. The last set was fairly easy. I need to go up heavier. And so that's how I tracked it, which is how I got stronger. On benchmarks and workouts and things like that we did, I'll track it and just make little notes. Yeah, workout felt good today. But then I can also look back of, oh man, I've had beers the last few nights out for happy hours, for work or social. No wonder I was dragging a little bit today. So I'm a little aware of that. If I'm doing a specific program, squatting program are really the specific ones I'll follow. There's a couple of iPhone apps that work really, really well. One is just called Hatch Squat, that I greatly enjoy. Hatch Squat Calculator is actually what it's called, and it gives you the program. You literally enter your front squat and your back squat maxes. It walks you through a full program, tells you what weights, what reps to use, It's an awesome program. It's a great starter squat program. Then there's another one called Smolov that is a brutal workout calculator, but what it does is it'll give you back squat program or bench press program, and it's a heavy, high volume one, but it spits it all out there. Otherwise, I just try to go in and pick some different workouts that would get me out of my comfort zone. If I know my legs are shot, then I'm going to do something a little more upper body that's going to hit me to failure and mix in some cardio. If it's squatting, I need to mix in some wall balls and some running and some lunges, things like that where I'm out of my comfort zone, and then I'm just going to write it down. If I'm out on my own, write it down. How did I do? I don't CrossFit anymore. I spent years CrossFitting, and that's the second best thing I thought about it was it forced people out of their comfort zone with very basic workouts that you could track because you were always tracking your time or your reps, and you could go back to workouts and always evaluate how well you're doing. Because for a lot of people, it's like, I'm not getting any stronger. I'm not getting any faster. I don't look any different. But when you redo a workout, you see how much stronger, how much faster you're getting, where you slowed down this time versus last time. And that's an incredibly beneficial piece of it. So tracking everything from your workouts to life is huge.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you because I think it's really important, especially, when you look back and you might think that you haven't made as much progress as you actually have, but when you can actually document it down in details and reflect back and actually see the progress that you've made, I think that there's something special in that. And you keep talking about comfort zone. I'd like to pick your brain a little bit about the connection between going outside of your comfort zone and developing, a stronger competitive mindset. Because I know for me, when I was dealing with my medical trauma, going to all of these doctor's visits was kind of out of my comfort zone. And then for me, doing a holistic approach, that was outside of my comfort zone. And then when I started my Instagram account and I started the blog and then I started the podcast, all of these things were out of my comfort zone. But for me, what I've realized is the more I go out of my comfort zone, the more confidence I have, the more I'm willing to reach out to random people, the more I'm connecting. And honestly, the more my life it's really improving in more areas than one.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, I laugh. Brene Brown talks a lot about this, but of the idea of courage trumps comfort. But how much better is a life that's courageous over one that's comfortable? I mean, it's not like Donald Miller talks about it in his book, A Million Miles in 1,000 Years. If we went to a movie and the entire 2 hours was just about a guy that wanted a BMW, he worked his normal job, he saved his money, went home every night after work, end of movie, he buys a BMW, rolls off into the credits. Like, we would be ticked off we wasted 2 hours doing it. There was no adversity he overcame. There was nothing out of his comfort zone that he had to do to achieve it. It simply was a daily act of comfort. Whereas the movies, the stories, the books we love, there's always a moment of courage. Whether it's the action movie where the hero's jumping off the building to save someone, whether it's the romantic comedy who you're just cheering for the guy just to finally say I love you to the girl, that you can just feel the tension. You're just wanting him to finally be courageous, do it. Courage always makes a better story than comfort. And so for people to get used to getting out of that comfort zone, it's a daily practice. One, it's incredibly mindful of you, and it's training yourself to be more mindful. I had a guy on our podcast, Kyle Brown, who's an entrepreneur and the founder of Fit 365. He talked about when he was speaking and starting to do more public speaking, he went and got involved with stand-up comedy, which is not something he would normally do. He has a slight tremor. It's something he was aware of and was, a little bit nervous about, self-conscious about. But he decided through that practice, he said, listen, what's the worst thing that can happen to me? What is the worst? Okay, it doesn't work. Some of it doesn't work. Do I become a better speaker by going through this process and learning how to speak in front of people, being on stage, being able to tell humor? Yes. Does learning to speak better ultimately get me to one of my biggest goals of wanting to talk to more people and impact them? Yes. The pros of the benefits of what could happen drastically outweigh the cons of someone laughing or not thinking my joke is funny. And he said that same mindset helped him when he was with his daughter and they had daddy-daughter dances, and he didn't really know how to dance. He was like, I was always the guy tucked against the wall at high school dances. I'm not the guy that was out there dancing. But if my daughter wants to dance, I don't care what I look like, because the pros of her having a great time and spending time, quality time with her dad, far outweigh me worrying about what anyone else is thinking. And then you start to learn that you don't really care what anyone else is thinking, because a lot of people are stuck in that same position of worrying what everyone else is thinking versus actually thinking something about you. And so if you struggle with getting out of your comfort zone, if you struggle with starting to be courageous, pick one thing. It could be something simple that you challenge yourself to do. Of if you go out for Starbucks every day, and instead of going through the drive-thru, why don't you just go 10 minutes early, go into the coffee shop, order your cup of coffee, and then just say hi and talk to a stranger. That's it. Just walk up, make a simple conversation with a stranger. That's all. You've got a 10-minute window, so you've got to be out the door. But saying hi to someone, if that gets you into your comfort zone, if being in your comfort zone is not talking to anyone you don't know, then that's something to do. One of the things I love is, from a health and wellness standpoint, I love doing workouts, one, first thing in the day, but two, that push you. Really, to the point that if you were doing it by yourself, a lot of times you wouldn't finish the workout. That's what I love about group classes. I think I mentioned earlier, when I was doing CrossFit, number 2 on my list was the tracking and fitness. But number 1, the thing that I think that fitness sport community has done so incredibly well is they've created community. And when you're in a community, you're sweating together, you're hurting together in these workouts, but you're pushing each other. And so no one's quitting. You're all in it together. And I think a lot of studio gyms and fitness areas still do that today outside of CrossFit. Spin classes, the studio fitness gym I'm at, Mac, a lot of them have that, because when you're in there together, there's a little bit more of a competitive spirit, but there's a community factor of, I'm not going to quit, so you're not going to quit. And so even though this sucks, we're going to keep going farther than we would if we were by ourselves. And once you start doing that in workouts, it's amazing what happens to the rest of your life. That is one reason I love competition and competing against yourself. And one reason I love sports is because it allows you the opportunity to see what you're truly capable of. And it's always, always more than you actually think you're capable of.
Right.
What we're capable of is always more than we give ourselves credit for. We always undersell ourselves. And so by putting yourself in a workout that's going to push you a little bit harder, you're going to have to go a little bit longer than if you were just by yourself in the gym with headphones on. You'd never go to that point. That's good, because when you leave and you're like, I did that today, then you're going to start to believe that you can do that in other areas of your life. When you go up and talk to a stranger and they start talking to you back, and you realize like all those fears that you had of what could go wrong don't ever come to fruition, you start to believe that if you start doing other things in your life that are maybe a little more uncomfortable at first, that maybe there's a greater outcome. And so always look at the positives, the benefits. They always outweigh the negatives.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think, for one, obviously, changing your perspective and seeing the situation differently. But when you get out of your comfort zone and you start to reach achievements, whether it's in working out or your career or in relationships, you can take those wins and transition them to other areas of your life and create wins there.
Yeah, I mean, what happens in one area of our life is never isolated from what happens in other areas of our lives. I mean, we tend to think sometimes that things are compartmentalized, but they're really not. When you achieve success doing something, you're going to gain confidence to achieve success in another area. When you become more comfortable with being uncomfortable in the gym, you find that you start to develop a little bit of a comfort pushing outside of that comfort zone in your work or in your relationships or in the rest of your life. Everything that you do impacts everything else that you do.
Absolutely. Where can people connect with you that'd like to learn more about your podcast, your website, or reach out to you on social media?
Yeah, I would love it. I would love if someone drops by and says hi. I'm probably most active on Instagram. My handle is Life is Worth Competing For. But you can connect directly with me on there or on my website, jakeathompson.com. And if you love all this talk about competing, our main website for our company is Compete Every Day. It's the same tag you'll find on all of the social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're all across them. And then our podcast is on there as well. Not sure what date we'll be airing, but our season 2 of our podcast drops on June 26th. And so check it out, competeeveryday.com. We'll have all the info.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'll make sure to get all of the links from you after this and include them in the show notes once I release this episode too.
Awesome.
So I have 2 final questions for you. The first one is, what is your definition of adversity and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, so adversity to me is any difficulty or obstacle that stands in your way. And that could be in the pursuit of a goal, that could be in the way of your life. And to me, as funny as this may sound, a lot of adversity to me is a challenge. And I look at it as a challenge because I feel I was created for a specific purpose. And if there's something in my way, it's my job to find a way to overcome it, because the obstacles and the adversities we overcome are the stories and the chapters in our lives that impact others, because we're not influenced or inspired by the easy things that we accomplish in life. We're inspired and encouraged by the things that we see people do that are amazing and out of the ordinary and are the difficult. And always overcoming adversity for each of us is something that's difficult, because to us it's difficult. And so for me, it's a challenge and an opportunity to write a chapter or a story in my life that can impact someone else.
I love that definition. So what are 3 tips that you can give someone who's facing adversity in their life right now?
Compete. Don't give up. That's the first one. Don't give up. Don't give in. Understand that what I just said. Understand that adversity presents you a opportunity and a platform to inspire someone else. And you could be just the thing that they need. 2, I would look at how you're facing that adversity. Are you going after it head on, or are you shirking away from it, shrinking back in fear? And if you are pulling back in fear, I'm going to encourage you to do 2 things. 1, get after it. 2, find people. If you're not running with a group of close-knit individuals that encourage you and challenge you, I'm going to encourage you to do just that. If you surround yourself with people who are going to spur you on and challenge you, they're going to help you keep going through that adversity. They're going to be the ones that are going to pick you up when you've gotten knocked down. And on the days when you start to turn away and not press into that adversity to overcome it, they're going to be the ones that push you in the back and say, no, keep going. So surround yourself with people, whether it's online, socially, whether it's offline. Get in groups, find people that are trying to do the same thing, lifting each other up. And the third thing I would say is always remember your why. Always remember what you started, what that purpose was. If it's an adversity going toward a goal, why did you originally go after the goal? Not what is the goal, but why? Why did that goal matter so much? If it's something from an illness or something in a relationship, look at those pieces and say, all right, why did this start? If it's an issue with the relationship, like, why did I first get into this relationship? What about it was so great? I've got to be able to work through this adversity. And if it's something you're facing in life, loss of a job, things like that, understand that your story is not over, that you still have that purpose to deliver something to the world. And so focus on that, keep taking action, and those opportunities will present themselves.
I love all 3 of those tips because I think they're all, they're very practical. And I think the community especially is something that's very important and sometimes often overlooked. But also, linking back to your why and your story is just, it's so important to, dig deep to your purpose and to bring that up, especially when you need it and you're struggling on those days to compete. I do want to just take a moment though, to acknowledge you and thank you for coming on to the podcast, but also for everything that you've done. I think you said in 2008, 2009, you left your your company and you started to build something that was more purposeful for you and creating a legacy. And, you realize that your life is, it's more than just about you, and you wanted to make an impact in other people's lives. So I just want to, take a moment to thank you for everything that you do with Compete Every Day, your website, your branding, your podcast, your coaching, and just for you reaching out to people and helping change their lives. So thank you very much for all of that.
Thank you very much. That means a lot.
Awesome. It was great having you on here today, Jake.
Appreciate it.
I hope you guys enjoyed today's show with Jake. It is so important to build that competitor's mindset and to build resilience. If you'd like to connect with Jake more, then head over to the show notes at laughatadversity.com/18. Also, if you could please take a moment to head over to iTunes or your podcast player and please leave a rating and review. It's the easiest way for the podcast to be found by others.